Hello, I'm Harvey Gann. Thank you for tuning into this podcast. I appreciate your giving time and attention to this critical decision that you face as a Mecklenburg County voter. As you probably know, the Mecklenburg County Board of Commissioners have approved a referendum for you to vote on in November that would levy a quarter-cent sales tax to stabilize and transform the arts and cultural community. Those dollars would serve Mecklenburg County residents and visitors through arts, science, and history programming. They would also be used to support creative individuals and cultural organizations. The Arts and Science Council created this podcast to help inform and educate voters on why your tax dollars are needed and how the money will be used, and most importantly, who it will benefit. As you know, I'm a longtime supporter of arts and culture. I believe that if we want to create a more culturally connected and equitable community, this sales tax is something that you should support. Thank you once again for taking the time to listen to this podcast.
You're listening to Culture for All, a podcast produced by the Arts and Science Council in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm your host, Andy Goh. Today's episode of Culture for All features an in-depth discussion about the proposed quarter-cent sales tax increase to be voted on by Charlotte-Mecklenburg residents, such as yourself, on November 5th. Early voting is already underway, and this podcast is a great opportunity to educate yourself on the proposed sales tax. Joining us to speak on the tax are Darryl Williams, chair of the Partnership for a Better Mecklenburg campaign, a campaign aimed at raising awareness about the tax. Also on the microphone are Susan B. Harden, Mecklenburg County Commissioner for District 5 representing parts of South Charlotte, and Jeep Bryant, the President of the Arts and Science Council. If this is the first time you're tuning into the Culture for All podcast, I implore you to listen to this conversation, but also take time to listen to the other 5 episodes in this series, which are more focused on the public benefits of the cultural sector to local businesses, artists, educators, and the community at large. Simply search Culture for All on the podcast platform of your choice. Thanks again for listening. We're going to jump right into the conversation with Darryl, Susan, and Jeep, but please take the time to go vote on this initiative on November 5th. Your voice is a critical one in determining the future of our community.
So joining me today to talk about the tax are Jeep Bryant, who is the president of the Arts and Science Council. Hello, Jeep.
Hello, Andy.
And Darryl Williams, who is the chair of Partnership for a Better Mecklenburg campaign. Hello, Darryl.
Hi, Andy.
Also on the microphone today is Susan B. Harden, a Mecklenburg County Commissioner for District 5, covering parts of South Charlotte. How are you doing, Susan?
Hey, Andy. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, let's just jump right into this. The first 5 episodes in the Culture for All podcast discussed why the programming the Arts and Science Council provides is crucial to our community. You can learn all about the culture blocks and all about the different programming resources that the ASC provides. But Jeep, since you're here with us, I'd like for you to talk a little bit briefly and broadly about why the tax is on the ballot for Mecklenburg County voters in 2019.
Well, Andy, it's on the ballot really for several reasons related to arts and culture, and I know Darryl will also speak about the investments we will be making in parks and education. From an arts and cultural perspective, it would enable us to strengthen the operating support that's provided to a wide range of cultural organizations here in Mecklenburg County. So those are the unrestricted dollars that help organizations do a number of things in expanding programming and outreach and building new audiences. Because many of your listeners are familiar with the Culture Blocks program, I should also mention this would give us the opportunity to expand that programming to more neighborhoods and offer some of the more popular programming in Culture Blocks on a more sustained basis year-round. We're also going to have opportunities when this tax passes, to invest more in artists and creative individuals in Mecklenburg County. We have some small grant programs right now that artists are able to take advantage of, but not nearly enough to meet the potential and the demand from artists here in Mecklenburg County. And then finally, we see great opportunities to partner with the schools to really strengthen the arts and cultural experiences that our students in public schools across Charlotte-Mecklenburg have. Step one will be restoring field trips that have been eliminated because of lack of funding. We also see other opportunities to integrate with the curriculum in schools to enhance the arts and cultural experience that our students are having.
So, Darryl, I want to go over to you as well. You are the chair of the Partnership for a Better Mecklenburg campaign. So let's start off by talking a little bit about that. What is the Partnership for a Better Mecklenburg campaign, and what is its goal?
The Partnership for a Better Mecklenburg campaign is basically a campaign committee that's made up of grassroots representatives of our community to go out and help educate and make the public aware of what this quarter-cent sales tax will do to help benefit our community.
So let's get right into the meat of the discussion here, guys. Again, if our audience wants to learn more about why the tax is needed and what the ASC itself does, episodes 1 through 5 of the Culture for All podcast are great to listen to. You can hear them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you get your podcasts. But today, I really want to spend some time talking about some of the points that the community has given to push back against the tax. So, Darryl, I'd like to start with you with this question. Why should community members support the arts, parks, and education when there are other priorities surrounding our community, including healthcare, affordable housing, education, so on and so forth? Why is this quarter-cent sales tax something that the community should support?
Well, what I would say is that we have a lot of complex needs in our community. We have a lot of challenges, and they're so complex, I don't think you can deal with them one or two things at a time. You have to make sure that there are several things happening at the same time to make sure we're meeting comprehensive needs that exist in the community. And some may be higher priority than others, but they all are important. And we really need to make sure we're working on them together instead of separate.
Susan, I'd also like to ask you as well, with so many other priorities and issues that the community is facing, why is the arts, parks, and education worthy of the community's investment alongside all of those other priorities?
Well, I want to say a couple of things. One is that I want to assure the audience that, in fact, we are addressing those things in Mecklenburg County. We spend millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars addressing those critical human services needs, and we address those in our general budget. And we've continued to make and increase our commitments to those. But the commitments to arts, parks, and education are really about us coming together as a community and deciding through referendum that we want to make specific investments that really improve the quality of life for every resident here in Mecklenburg County, brings together diverse people across the board, and makes commitments to raise up specific sectors, the cultural sector, the education sector, and our environmental sector. So I just want to assure the audience that we are dealing with the human services, and we have made tremendous efforts towards addressing affordable housing, and we'll continue to address those efforts. This effort is really about recognizing the common good that arts, parks, and education does for our community.
Yeah, I was going to say, in addition to what Susan just shared, like Susan shared, we raised over $200 million for affordable housing. And so it's actually being done. It just takes time. As an architect, I know it takes a lot of time to develop a project. And so while those projects are being done, we have a lot of other challenging needs in our community that also needs to be addressed. And so we need to deal with them comprehensively together to meet all the needs to improve the quality of life of our community.
Yeah, I think it's really about balance. This is Susan. I think it's really about balance. I mean, we certainly need to provide programs and support for people who are needy, and that is critical. And at the same time, we also have to make long-term investments in the quality of life for our community. It's not an either or, it's a both and.
And Andy, I've also found that it's helpful when I've received questions about the arts and culture investment to think about the proportion of this investment versus the broader budget in Mecklenburg County and the city. The $22.5 million that would be invested in arts and culture will be transformational for arts and culture, but it is 0.5% of public funds in the county. So as we think about prioritization of needs and investments, that proportion feels right to us. It will enable us to do much more, but at the same time, as Susan mentioned, a vast majority of public funds are being targeted to those critical community needs, such as housing and other areas.
The last question that I have for you guys here is along those same lines too. Another common critique of the tax that I've heard is that it's a regressive tax, of course, meaning that it impacts lower income populations to a higher degree than it would higher income populations. So I'd like to, Darryl, I'll start with you again. What would you say to critics who are bringing up the fact that it is a regressive tax?
Well, I think most taxes are probably regressive. I think some are more than others. And I think when you look at the opportunity that we had to come up with the way to fund these priorities, this was the one that we thought was better because it wasn't on all the property owners. It also included visitors that come into our community. And we're talking about 5 cents for every $20. So it's not a whole lot of money compared to the impact that it can have on our community.
Not only that, but certain purchases are exempt from the tax, such as pharmaceuticals and what else?
Excluded from the tax is gasoline, groceries, prescription medications, and rent. So the idea that the benefit that this is going to bring to our community, I also believe that the benefit in every classroom from a great teacher and having a teacher assistant, that's worth a lot. And the benefit to children, all children, from having great parks and fantastic rec centers, that's a benefit. And the benefit from having, great programs in your community, that's a benefit. So, I think that you have to consider also the benefit to all children.
Jeep, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I would say from an arts and culture perspective, the Arts and Science Council Board adopted a commitment to cultural equity that guides our work today that will become even more critical once public funding is in place. So there will be a higher level of expectation that when we look at where the money is being invested, we have to remember where did the money come from, and making sure that those who are paying this tax see a real and tangible benefit to the investment that they're making.
So all of this goes towards a question that I think has been on the minds of plenty of Charlotteans, which is how is this going to make Charlotte and Charlotte-Mecklenburg County a more equitable community? As we all know, the Economic Mobility the Economic Mobility Report ranked us 50th out of 50 out of major metropolitan areas in the country in terms of upward economic mobility. So how is an investment in arts, culture, parks, and education going to help address that gap?
Well, investing in it alone wouldn't necessarily make it equitable, but I think it's the structure that we put together with the new governance structure from the county that's going to make sure that it's equitable, making sure that there are representatives from both city council, county commission, grassroots representatives from the community, as well as the towns, getting together on a regular basis, deciding how best to fund this with the overarching goal being equity. And so I think that's what's going to make sure it's equitable, making sure that we have everyone around the table to make sure it gets done that way.
Andy, we've also seen national research that's shown the strong correlation between investing in arts education and the performance of students. There was one particular study done several years ago, I believe by the National Endowment for the Arts, looking at the impact on low-income students when exposed to arts opportunities in school. The findings of that research showed that students that had exposure to rich experiences in the arts became 5 times more likely to graduate from high school, 3 times more likely to attend college. So a number of studies that have demonstrated these investments do make an impact on the lives and long-term success of students.
Susan, so I'll post that last question to you as well. How is an investment in the arts, education, and parks going to make Charlotte-Mecklenburg a more equitable community?
Well, I believe that especially those are like public commitments. And those are public commitments in the things that make us better as people and make us better as a community. And so they're investments that impact everybody. And they really raise the stakes for our community and say collectively that we want to be better as a community. And so making these investments is critical because it raises the ships of every person in the community.
A big concern for the community is how the money is going to be allocated. Of course, everybody wants an equal share of the pie to be distributed to them, but there's plenty of people who worry about how that pie is going to be split up and who's going to be deciding where that money goes. Jeep, can you tell us a little bit about how the ASC is changing to respond to that?
Yeah, the key thing that will happen, Andy, after voters say yes to this referendum is the board of the Arts and Science Council will change significantly. There will be much broader public participation on the Arts and Science Council board. So there will be elected officials from the county commission, from the city council. There will be appointees from both the county and the city. And then there will also be grassroots community-based representation on the Arts and Science Council board as well. We talked earlier about the priorities of funding crossing operating support, neighborhood programming, support for artists, investment in arts education. So we know the thematic areas that the community has said will be important for investment. That board will help ensure that the money is invested in the areas that the community has deemed to be most important. Some additional steps that we will go through will include a public contract with the county. That contract will be discussed at public hearings as part of the budget process. And there will be an expectation that at least every year, if not more frequently, but at least annually, there will be a thorough report, not just on where did the money go, but over time, what impact have these investments had? So there will be the opportunity for the board, the county commission, the city council, and the public at large to assess, is the money that we have invested through this important mechanism, is it in fact making an impact across Mecklenburg County?
So it sounds like two of the very biggest changes there are you're restructuring the board to include much more representation, not only from the city, but also the county as well. And you're also setting up this reporting infrastructure that's going to be public information as well.
Well, and just let me, if I can add, Andy, this is Susan Harden. The board will be citizen-led. I mean, that's what's so critical is that it will be leading with the voices of citizens, and so that's the great thing about this structure.
Susan, could you tell me a little bit more about the restructuring of the ASC and why the county felt that it was necessary to put that on as part of the tax?
Well, at Mecklenburg County, we looked at best practices and models in other communities. And we recognized that as a board, we did not want to be responsible or make the grant-making decisions, that we thought it was in the best interest of the community to have a citizen-led board that was responsible for making those decisions and those allocations. So we looked at communities across the United States and decided this reconfigured or restructured ASC board was really the best way to go and the best way for our community to move forward.
Susan, I'd also like to ask you another question around the county commissioners that seems to keep popping up among the community, and that is the question of how responsible are the commissioners to keeping this allocation for the money. It's been said several times that there is no mechanism to keep the county commissioners honest to this allocation that we're voting on. So why should voters trust what the county commissioners will do with this money in the long term?
Well, I think the voters have put us in this place to address critical needs. And I think that we have made commitments in terms of how we're going to allocate this funding. It's really, at that point, we're going to follow through on those commitments. And then, voters need to stay engaged. They need to come to commission meetings, and they need to make sure that they're holding their elected officials accountable. And so I would say that, hold us accountable. We've made promises, and it's the voters' responsibility to help us carry through on those promises.
Jeep, I'm going to go back to you for just a moment. This is actually more of a functional question for you, but the language on the ballot that voters will see when they go to their balloting locations, the language on the ballot doesn't say anything specifically about the money going towards arts, parks, education, or anything of that nature. It merely says something to the effect of voting for an extra quarter-cent sales tax, which, that doesn't do anybody any favors when you don't say what the money is for. But Jeep, can you talk a little bit about what the language on the ballot is and what voters should be prepared for when they go to their locations?
Yes, voters should look for sales and use tax on the ballot. The language is prescribed by the North Carolina State Legislature. It could not be changed, and it is very limited. So it will ask voters, are you for or against a quarter-cent increase in the sales and use tax for Mecklenburg County in addition to all other taxes and levies? So because it will not say that this investment is for parks, for arts, for education, that has really made the campaign and the information challenge greater than it would typically be, say, in a bond campaign, for example. So we have been working very hard to make sure that the voters understand the important areas that these investments will touch. We've done a lot of research in Mecklenburg County, and the ballot language by itself is not compelling, and that's an understatement. But once voters are told, if this money were invested in parks, arts, and education, what do you think? Vast majority will then say absolutely, but we have to clear that hurdle of understanding, and that's why this podcast and other forms of communication are so important.
I'd like for each of you to drop your titles for a moment. Drop, all the things you have behind your name and all the institutions that you represent, and tell me just for a moment why you would support this tax from a personal standpoint, from just Darryl's standpoint, not the campaign for a Better Mecklenburg standpoint, but just Darryl's standpoint. So, Darryl?
Yeah, I would support this tax because of the money that's it has the potential to generate. And those dollars could really help our community economically. It could help with our economic mobility issues. It can make sure that our kids and our seniors have a lot of things to do within their community and within the arts groups, organizations. And the fact that it's just something that's important to our community to make sure that I think this tax could help bring our community together as well. The idea that we have so many differences in our community, but everyone cares about parks, arts, and education, and it brings us together to care about things that we have in common. And so I think those things are really important. Economic mobility, making sure that kids stay active and seniors have things to do in their community, and that people in depressed and challenging communities feel like others care about their community and care about them by bringing these things to them instead of assuming that they're going to come uptown.
Susan B. Harden?
So I'm a longtime resident of Mecklenburg County. I'm a mom. I'm a daughter of a teacher. And I really believe that these investments in our community will make our children better, that they'll make healthier children and more educated children, and more children will reach their dreams and see their dreams through arts and culture. And because I know that personally, because I've seen my children see their dreams through visits to Discovery Place and to the orchestra and to the nature preserves. And I want every child in our community to have those experiences.
And Jeep?
And Andy, I'm involved because I think back to some very old photos that my dad took of me here in Charlotte. And when I say old, they are old photos. But I know there's one of me as a toddler feeding the ducks in Freedom Park. My dad was always in the audience when I was up on stage. So there's some photos from Children's Theater where I had the chance to be on the stage there. And it has really struck me as we've talked about this campaign and as I've met so many people across Mecklenburg County that the wonderful experiences that I had growing up have not been available to all kids in Mecklenburg County. So I benefited from the investments that the county made in parks. I benefited from an education standpoint and having the opportunity to be involved in the arts. We have to make sure that those opportunities are available to every single child in Mecklenburg County. So when you see the campaign and the Partnership for a Better Mecklenburg, it talks about how this really is for our kids, and that's so true when you think about all three areas of these investments, but it's also for our seniors. So we say it's for our kids, it's for our community. It really is for all of us, and that's why I'm involved.
Jeep Bryant is the president of the Arts and Science Council. Susan B. Harden is Mecklenburg County Commissioner for District 5, and Darryl Williams is the chair of the Partnership for a Better Mecklenburg campaign. Thank you all so very much for taking the time to sit down with us and to speak to the Mecklenburg County electorate.
Thank you.
Thanks
Andy.
you. Mm-hmm.
Thanks again to Darryl Williams, Susan B. Harden, and Jeep Bryant for speaking with us, and thank you, the listener, for tuning in. Now that you've heard directly from advocates of this tax, please take that information with you when you go to vote November 5th. Your voice is a critical one in determining the future of our community. Don't forget to listen to the other episodes in the Culture for All podcast series. The first 5 episodes talk about the immense public benefits of the cultural sector. The Culture for All podcast is produced by the Arts and Science Council in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Andy Goh of Gojo Studios. Music by Harvey Cummings.